Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the March webinar for the Spring Hydrologic Outlook. This is Chris Fultz from National Weather Service Central Region Headquarters. Today's briefing will be a general overview and update of the Spring Hydrologic Outlook for the Mississippi Basin, including the Red River of the North, the Souris River, and the Great Lakes drainages. Additional information and forecasts can be found online at www.weather.gov. Today's presenters are Corey Loveland from the North Central River Forecast Center, Jim Knoll from the Ohio River Forecast Center, Kevin Lau from the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center, James Paul from the Arkansas Red Basin River Forecast Center, and Jeff Grushel from the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center. We are recording this webinar, and a follow-up email will be sent with information on how to access the recording early next week. If you are having trouble with the slides not advancing during the webinar, you have two options. One, you can close your browser and log in again, or the slides were sent out as a PDF, and you should have those in your email. Should you have any questions during the webinar presentation, please do utilize the question box in the GoToWebinar GUI, and we are going to hold all questions till the end. With that, we'll go ahead and start with Corey Loveland. Go ahead, Corey.
Great. Thanks very much, Chris. Welcome, everyone, to this early spring flood outlook update to the Mississippi Basin Hydrologic Outlook presentation we gave about 2 weeks ago. So since our last webinar on February 22nd, conditions have changed and the flood potential has increased. We have elevated chances of flooding throughout the basin, especially in the upper Mississippi River. So I would encourage our partners on this webinar to continue to monitor weather forecasts for the precipitation types and amounts for your areas of concern. All right, so let's start off with discussing precipitation. As it has been the main player here this winter, and it'll also be the main driver for at least the next few weeks for the headwaters and as we go into the snowmelt season this spring. The last update, again, was about a couple weeks ago, so I wanted to show what total precipitation occurred last month in February, and also what percent of normal precipitation has fallen since our initial spring flood outlook. On the graphic on the left, we have the percent of normal of the total accumulated precipitation over the nation for the month of February. As you can see, last month was fairly wet across the country, with the West, North Central, Upper Midwest, Great Lakes areas, and across the Ohio and Lower Mississippi River basins getting a widespread over 200% of normal. Precipitation was near normal last month in the Central Plains, Central Illinois, Northern Indiana, and into Northern Ohio. Now on the graphic on the right, looking at the precipitation percent of normal since our outlook on the 21st. Following up from the February storm tracks, the precipitation pattern has followed similar patterns, bringing greater than 200% of normal moisture in about 4 sectors of the basin. One is across the southern states, and the second one is up north across Wisconsin, southeastern Minnesota, northern Iowa, and northern Michigan, including parts of North and South Dakota. The third was in the west over Colorado, Kansas, and finally the fourth one was up into Montana. Although across the Ohio Basin it has been drier than normal since our last outlook, they have been experiencing ongoing flooding in the Ohio Basin and southern Illinois, and moderate to major flooding on the Ohio and western Kentucky as a result of the recent rainfall. So according to the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information, they put out an update yesterday saying that of note, the month of February was the second highest February precipitation total on record across the nation. And also last month, record to near record precipitation fell over parts of the Tennessee and Ohio valleys, as well as across the northern Great Lakes and parts of the Northwest and northern High Plains. Also of note, the December through February winter precipitation total for the nation is ranked as the wettest winter on record, beating the winter of 1997 to 98. Now looking at temperatures from last month on the left graphic for the month of February, the northern plains area saw well below colder than normal temperatures in the 10 to 20 degrees below normal range, especially across Montana, northern Wyoming, North and South Dakota, and most of Minnesota, including Iowa and Nebraska. Then in the southern states, warmer temperatures dominated in the month. Lastly, there were near normal temperatures across most of the north and central plains. On the right graphic, for the mean temperature departure since our last initial outlook, again, the same pattern is continued with cooler than normal temperatures persisting across most of the north and plains regions, with persistent really cold temperatures continuing in the north and central plains, whereas the southern states again experienced above normal temperatures, especially in the extreme south. The Ohio and lower Mississippi basins have generally had near normal temperatures since February 21st. Again, a continuation of active storm tracks have kept the above normal precipitation pattern going, combined with the overall same pattern of generally colder temperatures throughout the northern states. For the late winter and early spring snowfall accumulation update, across the northern central area and central plains part of the nation has seen the continuation of the active storm track pattern, with some areas receiving upwards of 750% of normal snowfall, like a large portion of Kansas, and also well above normal snowfall amounts across Wisconsin and in the west and eastern Colorado. The headwaters of the Missouri and central Montana has also received an abundant amount of snowfall recently. Snowfall is generally above normal in the northern part of the basin, the Mississippi Basin, around 2 to 5 times the normal amount. Conversely, the dry snow pattern has been over eastern Iowa, northern Missouri, northern Illinois, northern Indiana, and into northern Ohio, with below normal snowfall amounts as you head south. In the Ohio River Basin and the southern part of the North Central River Forecast Center area, below normal snowfall has occurred as a result of the near to above normal temperatures prevailing there. Now looking at the snow water content comparison, I've got two graphs comparing our current snow water content throughout the basin on the right with the water content at this time last year on the graphic on the left. There's a widespread more amount of liquid equivalent in the snowpack this year, especially in the north part of the basin where 3 to 8 inches of water content prevails. Compared to last year, significantly more water content in the snow exists in North Dakota, the majority of South Dakota, throughout Minnesota and Wisconsin, most of Iowa, and the northern half of Michigan. As far as the western states, the eastern plains of Montana and the Rockies portion of Colorado and Wyoming that contribute to the Missouri are well above the water content compared to last year at this time. The light green circle annotates the significantly greater than last year's water content, especially in the upper peninsula and the northern reaches of the Great Lakes Basin. For soil moisture content, much of the Mississippi Basin remains much wetter than it did last year. This is a result of the persistence of snow cover and deep frost levels keeping the soil profiles wet with little to no snowmelt so far this year in the northern part of the basin. The majority of the basin continues to be in the 90th percentile and even higher in some areas across the north central area, including the Ohio Basin and the lower Mississippi Basin tributaries, and even across the central eastern states. As related to the last time this year and a number of other past years, current soil conditions are much wetter and more widespread. As you can see, our initial spring flood outlook near February 20th, the soil moisture graphic on the lower left, there is not much of a difference to current conditions compared to March 5th, with the only exception of south central Wyoming and northern Colorado becoming slightly drier. Here's the updated U.S. Drought Monitor. There remains very little dry soil and dry hydrologic conditions throughout the basin, whereas the only drought depicted in the basin is the moderate and severe drought across Colorado. As you can see from the initial spring flood outlook near February 19th, the drought monitor on the lower left, conditions have not changed too much as the abnormally dry conditions in North Dakota and northern Minnesota and part of southern Louisiana have been erased with the recent March 5th update. This should not be a surprise with the persistence of widespread precipitation this late in the winter and early spring, as wet conditions continue to prevail and increase. Drought and abnormally dry areas will continue to shrink across part of the nation. Now looking at the stream flow conditions across the nation, Not much of an update on the current USGS, United States Geological Survey 28-day average streamflow conditions since our initial spring flood outlook. Hydrologically, the rivers and tributaries remain mostly well above normal, with the antecedent high soil moisture conditions and the very active precipitation patterns to include rainfall runoff and snowmelt in some areas. Of course, some of the stream gauges are frozen in some areas up north, so that affects some of the stream flow average on the map. Also, the western states and the western areas of the basin, along with the far south part of the basin, remain in near to slightly above normal winter base flow conditions. Generally, the main stem Mississippi, including the headwaters and lower Mississippi Basin and the Ohio Basin, remain in higher than normal flow conditions, including the rivers in Kansas. Ice remains to be an issue in the northern areas, with the continuation of ice jam breakups and subsequent flooding, with at or above normal chances of flooding this spring due to the cold temperatures and wet conditions in the Midwest and northern plains. This slide shows the amount of flood storage the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has released within the Mississippi Basin. So of note is the storage used on the Cumberland at about 68%, the Barkley Reservoir in Kentucky at 55%, which was releasing about 376,000 cubic feet per second, in which they have lowered that release to about 110,000 CFS on Tuesday. The Kentucky Reservoir at 54%, the Tennessee River at 60%, and finally the Yazoo River at 68.2%. As of yet, no flood releases on the Missouri main stem, and little flood releases on the Arkansas and Red River have been used so far. Now transitioning to looking at the week 1 precipitation forecast. Bottom line is it looks like we have, or will be having, a very wet next 7 days, as indicated on this graphic. Beginning this weekend and through next week, we have a series of widespread events forecast with large accumulated amounts of 1.5 inches plus of precipitation over most of the Mississippi Basin. The largest forecast amounts for these events is concentrated over the lower Mississippi Valley, with widespread 2.5 to 5 inches of forecast accumulated rainfall for the week. In the upper part of the Mississippi Basin, total amounts of 2 to 3 inches surrounding Iowa are forecast for the week as well. The high elevations of the Central Rockies will receive snow accumulation. With these storm tracks, we should get additional large amounts of snow water content in the eastern plains, north central, and Great Lakes areas. The 7-day forecast will exaggerate the existing flooding on the Ohio in western Kentucky and on the Rock, Illinois, and Wabash rivers in Illinois and Indiana. With this large amount of widespread rain in the forecast, we should begin to see some additional surface runoff and ponding in low areas, as the rainfall contributes to snowmelt, and areas of frozen ground will increase the surface runoff. Now looking at the longer 3-month term outlook for April, May, and June for the spring and early summer time frame. The uncertainty is highlighted with both the forecast temperatures and precipitation patterns. Normal temperatures are forecast in the central region, with above normal conditions in the south and east of the country. Wet conditions are forecast across the majority of the southern half of the nation. Of note is the temperatures and precipitation amounts and patterns during this time frame will be the primary driver for the spring flood conditions in the upper portion of the basin. Now looking at the meat of our flood outlook and the overview of the entire Mississippi Valley River Forecast Center's flood potential, we expect a greater than 50% chance of widespread moderate, indicated in the orange boxes, to major flooding, indicated in the purple boxes, all across the area within the 90-day window. The major flooding is forecast primarily in the Mississippi River Valley, including some tributaries, which are mostly major flooding, mostly in the northern half of the Mississippi system. Also, major flooding is expected, moderate to major flooding is expected in the lower Missouri and also in the Red River of the north. The concern and potential for impactful flooding is by far more widespread and greater this year as compared to many recent years. To see more detail on flood risks within the 90-day outlook period, please go to our long-range outlook at the website listed here to get more details on the basin or river forecast point of concern. You're able to select the stream gauge either by state, the Weather Forecast Office, the River Forecast Center, or the Water Resource Region. Just to compare the flood outlook for the entire Mississippi Basin issued 2 weeks ago, which is the graphic on the left, compared to our recent revision issued this morning, the graphic on the right. As you can see, there are many more river forecast points highlighted in major and moderate at this time. So we want to at least express our elevated concern for the potential for greater chances of flood flows in the next number of weeks. This concludes the overview of the general hydrologic conditions of the Mississippi Basin. We will now transition to the individual River Forecast Center basins, where we will go into more detail of the updated flood risks and outlooks of each basin. I will start it off by giving an overview of the revised flood outlook for the North Central River Forecast Center. So, for an overview of the North Central River Forecast Center area, we have to talk a lot about the very wet conditions that have been the main player in our spring flood outlook. Current soil moistures on the left graphic show a widespread 90th and higher percentile throughout the upper Mississippi and Great Lakes Basin. The Hudson Bay has near normal soil moisture at this time. The right graphic shows the persistence of above normal precipitation pattern with a widespread 200 to 300% of normal snowfall occurring, especially in the north central Wisconsin area, with amounts upwards of 300 plus percent. Near normal conditions exist in central Michigan, northern Indiana, central Illinois, and northern Missouri. So across the Minnesota River, upper Wisconsin, the headwaters of the Mississippi, and into northern Iowa, northern Illinois, and Michigan, we may see some melt as we get slightly warmer temperatures in the next 7 days. With these forecast storm systems, what will be difficult is the rain versus the snow typing in our models, and we're a little bit uncertain at this point. But temperatures are forecast to cool back down after each event, so conditions will probably refreeze. At this time, we do not expect to have any significant melt in the short term, but there is a degree of uncertainty at this point. The widespread rain event over Saturday and Sunday should produce some melting, mainly in the Wapsipinicon and Rock Rivers, to include a high possibility of rain over much of Iowa and northern Illinois. There's also another widespread system on track to affect us on Wednesday and Thursday. As we get closer, we'll have higher certainty on the rain versus snow line at that time. Right now, we're thinking that the main snowmelt should not occur within the next few weeks. We anticipate snowpack to generally stay frozen in place with additional snow added from these pending precipitation events across the northern states, including Iowa, northern Illinois, and Michigan in the next few weeks. Some areas, rain will fall on the snow, creating runoff. So please watch the forecast as we get closer to these events. Now looking at our updated snow water equivalent graphic here. As you can see, we still have a widespread snow cover of higher than normal liquid water in the snowpack throughout the Hudson Bay, upper Mississippi, and very high amounts in the Great Lakes Basin, as I mentioned before. The highest snow water content is confined to the upper peninsula of about 14 to 18 inches, with a widespread 2 to 6 inches accumulated throughout the majority of the River Forecast Center region. This graphic is comparing our current modeled water content against the historical record in our model. As you can see, we are in the top quarter of the historical record for water content. With the additional widespread snow, the ranking of our modeled snow water content has risen from 60% and higher to 70% and higher throughout the area. Mostly we have about 3 to 5 inches of water content throughout the River Forecast Center area. Also of note is there's a graphic that comes out from the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. They track the state snow depth and the ranking on a weekly basis throughout the state. This is the latest snow depth ranking from their website, and it's not surprising to see that over half of the state is currently ranked in the top 99 percentile, indicated by that light purple color. This ranking is based on the historical period of record for the snow depth. And based on historical records, the north and south parts of Minnesota are ranked with the highest snow depth. Now looking at the frost depths across the River Forecast Center area, as far as the frost depths go, not much has really changed since our last update, as no melt has occurred and the temperatures have remained cold across the area. Generally, frost depths are between 1 foot and 2 feet along the Mississippi River Basin, with shallower depths more south into Illinois and southern Michigan. Of course, deep frozen soils remain in the Red River of the North and the Souris Basins, so the 3 zones of deep, average, and shallow frost depths remain geographically spread out. All right, now looking at our flood outlook through mid-June, we'll start off with discussing the Hudson Bay area. I wanted to note that our long-range outlooks are incorporating the forecast precipitation over this weekend and into Monday. The Souris River Basin risk of flooding has been elevated to be normal to slightly above normal, and also we have an elevated risk throughout the Red River of the North Basin as well, with the additional snow. Devil's Lake flood potential remains at near normal. The current level is at 1,448.3 feet. With current snow conditions, the lake is expected to rise slightly higher than normal by about 1.5 feet, and we expect this to occur mid to late summer. The highest lake level at Devil's Lake in our modeling occurred in 1950, 1954, and 2004, where they all reached about 1,451.6 feet. Our current 50% chance forecast of the lake rising 1.5 feet puts the lake at an elevation of 1,449.8 feet. So it puts it pretty close to those historic levels. Now looking at the overall Great Lakes region, it has a continuation of an above normal flood potential in the 90-day outlook window. Mostly throughout Wisconsin, northern Indiana, and Michigan, snow levels are higher than normal, with wet soils contributing to this elevated risk. And now looking at the upper Mississippi Basin for the flood outlook through mid-June. The main story here, again, is the above to much above normal flood potential across southern Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, and extending down the Mississippi River, with widespread flooding potential throughout the area. In the headwaters of the Mississippi, an above normal threat continues based on the snowpack, the wet soils, and the frost depths. There continues to be an above normal flood threat along the Illinois River as well. Now, for the ice jam threat update, we continue into a normal to above normal forecast for ice jam threats. Not really much has changed since our last update a few weeks ago. Cold temperatures are continuing. Recent ice jams have continued to cause flooding, primarily on the Rock River in Illinois at Dixon, Joslyn, and Prophetstown. And also an ice jam continues at the Trempealeau River at Dodge, Wisconsin, but there's no associated flooding with that ice jam. Navigation-wise, reports show 80 to 100% ice coverage with 6 to 15-inch ice thicknesses from Lock and Dam 1 to Lock and Dam 13, mostly 3 to 10-inch ice thickness from Lock and Dam 14 to Lock and Dam 21, and 100% ice coverage with 2 to 4-inch thicknesses from Lock and Dam 22 to Lock and Dam 24. On the Illinois, reports show 100% ice coverage with 3-inch thickness at the Thomas J. O'Brien Lock and 10% coverage with 1-inch thickness at the Marcells Lock and Dam and 50% coverage with 2-inch thicknesses at the Peoria Lock and Dam. With the cold temperatures, ice continues to build on the rivers, with ongoing breakup ice jams forecasted to continue in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Flooding should continue to occur at these ice jam-prone locations, where temperatures remain significantly low and open water remains. The formation of new freeze-up jams or additional frazzle ice production may be likely. With that, I am going to turn it over to Jim Knoll with the Ohio River Forecast Center to continue the briefing.
All right, thank you there, Corey. The big headline for the Ohio and Cumberland River Basin is that due to the very wet soil conditions and the elevated river levels and also the lake levels, the region is very vulnerable to flooding into spring due to rainfall and thunderstorm events. The other important thing is river ice, the snow water content on the ground, and the frozen ground conditions in the northern portion of the Ohio Basin will not be the major player in the flood risk through spring. It is going to be the rainfall and thunderstorms. If we move on to the next slide, then we'll get into the details for the Ohio and Cumberland Basins and let you know what we're thinking. To begin with, we're going to start off across Indiana and eastern Illinois, where we are expecting at least a 50% chance of minor flooding for the upper Wabash Basin in northern Indiana, the Little Wabash Basin in southeast Illinois, and the White and Maumee River Basins in the state of Indiana. Moderate flooding is expected in the Patoka River Basin as well as the lower Wabash Basins in southwestern Indiana and southeast Illinois. Further to the south in Kentucky, we are expecting renewed minor to moderate flooding for the Kentucky, Green, and Cumberland Basins across the state. Minor flooding is also expected further east in the Licking Basin in the state of Kentucky. Moving on to the next slide, as we shift further to the east into the state of Ohio, we do expect some minor flooding to develop for the Maumee, Muskingum, Scioto, and Great Miami River Basins over the next several weeks. Further to the east in West Virginia, minor flooding is expected in parts of the Monongahela and Kanawha Basins. Further to the south in the state of Tennessee, we are expecting more minor to moderate flooding due to those heavy rain events that Corey was talking about, especially in the Cumberland and Red River Basins. And finally, on the Ohio River itself, we're not expecting at this time much flooding in the upper Ohio Basin. However, in the middle portion of the Ohio Basin, some additional new minor flooding is expected, and minor to moderate flooding is expected to redevelop across portions of the lower third of the Ohio River Basin. Moving on to the next slide, our main concern continues to be the very wet conditions across portions of Kentucky into Tennessee. We did establish with a recent heavy rain event a new record pool at Lake Cumberland in Kentucky of almost 5 feet higher than the old record set back in the flood of May 1984. This graphic here is for Nashville, and what it shows is the blue line indicates the normal flood risk of less than 20% chance of reaching flooding at Nashville, Tennessee, where this year, because of the very wet conditions and predicted rainfall, we're expecting a much higher percent, closer to 70% chance of renewed flooding for Nashville, Tennessee along the Cumberland River, and that's in the black line. This flood risk in portions of Tennessee and Kentucky is 3 to 5 times the normal, and that includes most of the Cumberland River Basin and the Cumberland River itself. So moving on to the next slide. So in summary, the flood potential is above normal, as we were talking a few weeks ago, for much of the Ohio River Basin, and that also includes the Cumberland River Basin of Kentucky and Tennessee. The exception to the above normal flood risk for our region is in the upper Ohio River Basin as well as the Lake Erie watersheds, where the potential is considered near normal. We do expect more minor to moderate flooding with those storm systems over the next several weeks, as Corey was highlighting, to move across much of the Ohio River Basin and Cumberland Basins. Isolated renewed major flooding is possible in the state of Kentucky and Tennessee. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Kevin Lau at the Missouri Basin to talk about the Missouri River area.
Thank you, Jim. Again, this is Kevin, and I'll be speaking about the Missouri Basin. Flood risk for this spring across the Missouri River Basin varies, with an enhanced risk for flooding in the eastern half of the basin and a near normal risk for flooding in the west and north. This graphic is intended to show a comparison of the probability to reach flood stage this spring as compared to the historic probability of reaching flood stage. And so this graphic does not show whether we expect a location to actually go to flood stage or not. It simply shows the difference the difference between the chances of reaching it this year as compared to normal. So cool colors, blues and greens, indicate a reduced risk for flooding. Warm colors, yellows and oranges, indicate an increased risk for flooding, and the little gray dots simply say that it's normal. And so this graphic depicts a much above normal risk in the eastern South Dakota, eastern Nebraska and western Iowa, eastern Kansas, and throughout the state of Missouri. Moving now to talk about the snow. This graphic, courtesy of the Natural Resources Conservation Service, shows the mountainous basin snowpack conditions in percent of median snow water equivalent. And mountain snowpack can be categorized this year as generally near normal in the mountainous west for this time of year. Looking at individual basins, the upper Missouri above Fort Peck, the Yellowstone, and the North Platte basins all are at near normal. The South Platte is slightly above normal. And by this time in the winter, we have normally accumulated about 80% of the seasonal peak snow water equivalent in the mountains. So we still have some time for things to change. Moving now to the plains. Oh, no, I'm not going to move to the plains. We issued the water supply forecast on March 4th for the mountainous area. And what you're seeing here is a depiction of that forecast at select points. And what this graphic is intended to show is that we are projecting a near average mountain runoff year, volumetrically speaking, for the west. And we do not expect significant flooding from mountain snowmelt alone. And now we'll move to the plains. Plain snow, as has already been discussed in this call, plain snow exists over the majority of the Missouri River Basin. The heaviest amounts in terms of snow water equivalent are to be found along the northern and the eastern boundary of the Missouri Basin, extending from northern Montana on into north central North Dakota, and then southward into eastern South Dakota. And along this band or arc of heaviest plain snow, we find 2 to 3 inch snow water equivalents common, and we have pockets in excess of 5 inches. I will now go area by area throughout the Missouri watershed, highlighting those basins where our long-range outlooks that we issued this week indicate a better than 50% of seeing flooding. And we'll start with Montana and work our way east and south. We do expect minor flooding along the Milk River in Montana, and right now that's all the flooding that we are expecting in that state. Moving over to North Dakota. In South Dakota, in North Dakota, minor flooding is likely along the Cannonball and along Spring Creek and Little Muddy Creek. In South Dakota, minor flooding is expected along the Little Missouri River and the Bad River. Moderate level flooding is likely along the Grand and the Moreau and the White Rivers in South Dakota. Major flooding is projected in the Big Sioux, the Vermilion, and the James River basins. Moving southward into Nebraska and Iowa, in Nebraska, minor flooding is likely along the Little Blue and Little Nemaha rivers, within the Loup River Basin, and along Salt Creek. The lower reach of the North Platte River in Nebraska may also see minor flooding. Moderate level flooding is expected along Elkhorn and Platte Rivers. It also has a enhanced risk for ice jam flooding as well. Major flooding is likely along the Wood River and the North Fork Elkhorn River, as well as along Shell and Logan Creeks. In the state of Iowa, the Nishnabotna River is expected to see moderate level flooding, and major flooding is projected for the Floyd, the Oshadin, Rock, Little Sioux, and Big Sioux rivers. We will now wrap up with the states of Kansas and the state of Missouri. Typically, springtime flooding in this lower portion of the Missouri River Basin is driven by thunderstorm activity, but this year we'll also have snowmelt as an early driver as well. In Kansas, minor flooding is projected in the Big Blue River Basin, the Little Blue River Basin, and in the Meridocene and Republican basins. Moderate flooding is likely in the Smoky Hill, the Saline, Solomon, and Little Osage. In the state of Missouri, minor flooding is likely along the Sheraton, Moreau, Big Piney, Gasconade, Marmaton, and Osage. Moderate level flooding is likely along the Grand, the Crooked, the Blackwater, the Lamine, Sac, South Grand, the 102, and the Platte rivers. Big Creek and Walkendall Creek will also see moderate level flooding, and the Tarkio River is expected to reach major levels. The lower Missouri River, downstream of Gavin's Point, is also expected to see episodic periods of moderate flooding along the entire reach. If you look at our long-range probabilistic graphics on either our website or local weather forecast service websites, we will be depicting major flooding for the Missouri River, but this is the inaugural year for probabilistic forecast below Gavin's Point, and so I would downplay the probabilities that we are putting out for major flooding. I fully expect to see moderate level flooding at many locations on the main stem. At this time, I do not expect to realize major level flooding on the main stem. In summary then, snowpack in the mountains is about average for this time of year, and we do not expect significant flooding from mountain snowmelt alone. There does exist an appreciable plain snowpack, and that will play a significant role in flooding this spring. And as we move towards warmer temperatures, we will have to watch for breakup ice jams. They're almost a certainty this year within the Missouri Basin. Wet conditions, current plain snowpack, and frozen ground conditions in the northern plains have resulted in a much increased risk for flooding in the eastern portion of the Missouri Basin. Thank you. This concludes the flood potential brief for the Missouri Basin. I'll now turn it over to James in the Arkansas Red River Basin.
Thanks, Kevin. Good afternoon, everyone. In the past couple of weeks, the areas that have been wet, the northwest and eastern parts of the basin, again received the bulk of the precipitation. However, only the areas of southwest Kansas and southeast Colorado gained with respect to percent of normal precipitation for the calendar year thus far. Totals for the eastern third of the basin have actually dropped a little bit closer to normal. And unfortunately, northeast New Mexico and the Texas Panhandle continue to be well below normal with respect to the last couple of months of precipitation. Next slide, please. With the additional precipitation over the last 2 weeks, the snowpack has continued to increase in the headwaters of the Arkansas River in Colorado. According to the NRCS, snow water equivalent is at about 130% of normal for this time of year, after an additional 1 to 2 inches over the past couple of weeks. Looking at the graphic in the lower right, you can see there is still about a month and a half of time for additional snow water to be added into the system. Fortunately, Pueblo Reservoir, which will be in line to capture most of this once the melt begins, is currently using only about 70% of its conservation storage, so it has quite a bit of room to store the runoff. Next slide. Since last month's spring flood outlook, the Corps of Engineers have been doing a good job of efficiently releasing the waters that they had stored in their flood pools and bringing some extra capacity back to their lakes and reservoirs. Almost all of them have at least 90% of their flood storage available, and only a couple in Arkansas have between 70 and 85% available. Next slide. My final slide shows the results of our long-range flood models. You can see quite a few more sites that have at least a 50% chance of minor or greater flooding as compared to the last outlook. This is mainly indicative of the fact that this outlook now includes the month of May, which is historically the month when the ABRC sees its most flooding. It shows that we can and do frequently get flooding anywhere across the eastern half of the basin this time of year, as our spring flooding is driven by convective storms that are beyond the forecasting resolution of the long-range meteorological outlooks. The only river system that shows a widespread consistent signal for above normal chances of flooding is the Neosho River in southeast Kansas and northeast Oklahoma. The remainder of the ABRC has a near normal flood risk. And with that, I'll pass it on to Jeff Grushel at the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center.
All righty, thank you, James. Since we last talked a couple of weeks ago, we got hit with pretty heavy rainfall across parts of Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee, with 10 to 15 inches of rainfall falling over this area. Obviously, stream flow conditions and soil moisture conditions are very wet over this area, and we're still dealing with major to moderate flooding on the Mississippi River just from this rainfall event that we've had over the last 2 weeks. Next slide. Obviously, with getting 10 to 15 inches of rainfall across that area, the storage that we have on some of the tributaries and stuff has changed considerably from the last time we had talked 2 weeks ago. Further over into the west and stuff, in the black and white, things have been pretty stable in the Red River systems as well. But you can see some of the charts that I have on the right screen with the Yazoo in Tennessee, where the bulk of that rainfall fell. Storage has been utilized considerably and stuff in those areas with rainfall, as you would expect. Next slide. So we currently have major to moderate flooding going on across the Mississippi, and obviously that's probably not going to change here for the next several months as we anticipate the spring rainfall and snow melt that we may get from the Missouri and the upper part of the Mississippi. So moderate to major flooding is possible for the lower Ohio and the lower Mississippi rivers. The Tennessee Valley is also, we're anticipating minor to moderate flooding for those tributaries going into the Tennessee River itself. Also in Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, we're forecasting minor to moderate flooding on the Yazoo Basin, Big Black, Pearl, Calcasieu, and Ouachita basins. And finally, areas really that we're thinking more seasonal and stuff will be along the coastal locations of Louisiana and maybe in the very upper reaches of northeast Texas, where you can still get minor flooding even just with normal spring and winter rainfall. And with that, I will conclude and pass it back. I'm sorry, one more slide here just to reiterate the flood potential summary. Moderate to major flooding across the lower Ohio and lower Mississippi rivers. Flood risk is well above normal for the Tennessee and lower Mississippi valleys. And really, the magnitude of any flooding that we may get is really dependent on that rainfall and thunderstorms that we get this late winter and spring. And with that, I will turn it back to Corey now.
Great, thanks. I want to thank everyone for their updates, and basically just to summarize what we've discussed today for a revised flood outlook summary through mid-June. We may see an above to much above normal flood risk over the entire Mississippi River Basin Valley, the eastern Missouri Basin, most of the Ohio, Cumberland and Tennessee basins, also the Red River of the North Basin and the Great Lakes area, the eastern part of Missouri Basin, including its tributaries, the Neosho River in Kansas and Oklahoma, and the Arkansas and Louisiana area. So a normal flood risks exists on the Souris, the upper Ohio and Arkansas Red River basins, and also the western Missouri Basin. I just want to reiterate that conditions have changed since our initial spring flood outlook issued 2 weeks ago, and again, the flood potential has increased due to the very wet and high water content conditions. The region is pretty vulnerable right now to future storm systems and, of course, any rapid warm-ups in temperatures. So as we get closer to the snowmelt period and enter into more spring-like weather of warmer temperatures and spring rains, again, I encourage our partners to continue to monitor weather forecasts for precipitation types and amounts for the areas of concern. We will also continue to monitor the flood risk and provide updates and support as needed. So this basically concludes the revised spring flood outlook, and we appreciate your time listening. After the briefing, please feel free to contact any of us with any questions at our email addresses listed here. The websites for our long-range outlook and real-time river forecasts are also listed on this slide. So with that, I want to just thank everybody again, and I'll turn it back over to Chris to wrap things up.
All right, Corey, thanks, and thanks to the other presenters today as well. So I just want to say right now we have no questions. So again, if you do have a question for any of today's presenters, please do go ahead and type those into the questions box there on the GoToWebinar GUI. Again, just a reminder, we did record this presentation. I'll try to get this uploaded and sent out to you guys hopefully this afternoon, but if not, it'll be early next week whenever we're able to get that information sent out to you with the recording. Do feel free to share those slides with any partners that you know of that were not able to attend today's briefing. And so at this point, again, still no questions. So I want to thank you again, say this is at this point the last scheduled briefing for this spring. We could be, given the circumstances, looking at additional briefings in the coming weeks, depending on how things play out. Stay tuned. We will certainly send an email out if there are additional briefings that are scheduled. In the meantime, you're always welcome to reach out to your local National Weather Service office or Servicing River Forecast Center for additional information or any specific questions that you might have. And also just a reminder as well that there is additional information and forecasts available at weather.gov for your information. So with no questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the briefing for today and wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you.
Ladies.